Hey, the space station games are unlike any other, and I think more people should play them. I want to talk about it. Space. The final frontier. These are the voyages of the SS Butts. Its goal? Survive like literally 90 minutes without everyone on the ship exploding and bleeding out all over the entire place. The space station games are really games like no other. Imagine if you took a ship simulation game like Kerbal Space Program, filled it with 100 players, and made everyone have to operate it for like an hour and a half while a big game of Ultimate Werewolf played out in the background. That's basically what you get from these games. And Space Station 13 is an old game, older than most multiplayer games that are still around these days. It's built in a game engine called the Beyond engine, and you might not have heard of it because it was released in 2003. A user named Exadev1 built the foundation of Space Station 13, sort of like an atmospheric simulator, and then that code was made open source in 2007, and ever since has splintered off into many different versions of what now is the core Space Station experience. The servers of the game might all be running different code bases or different game modes, but the general premise is usually the same. People in space trying to survive. Recently I started playing Space Station 14 playtests on Steam. It's one of the many community attempts to rebuild Space Station 13 in a little bit more of a user-friendly and less 2003 kind of way. Space Station 14 is a version which, while still in development, attempts to faithfully recreate the Space Station 13 experience while injecting some quality of life updates to the formula. But it's kind of the latest instance of me getting pulled back into the Space Station games, and it just made me want to reflect on why I like them so much. And just as a note, because I know someone's going to mention it, when I say Space Station in this video, I'm just referring to the collective existence of these servers and games in their entirety, not really any one specific version of the game itself. Okay, I see you all looking confused, and I know you're asking, what do you even do in the game? Well, buckle up, let's dive into it. As I mentioned, the general premise of Space Station is relatively simple. You're a person on a big space station who wants to do their job and usually stay alive. It's very relatable. It's how you go about doing that that's the complex part. A session of Space Station is typically divided into a round, usually lasting about an hour and a half. The main goal of every player is to make it to the end of the round still in one piece and evacuate the ship by the end of it. Players start by customizing their character. Some servers have different customization options, ranging from major gameplay differences such as different races who have unique traits, or more minor changes like short-sightedness or talking with an accent. These mostly serve to sort of flavor the experience for each character that you make. Along with customization, each player chooses a role on the ship that they're expected to fulfill. These can range from simple jobs with low responsibilities like passenger or janitor, to more complex jobs like captain or medical director, where you might be in charge of an entire department full of people. Once the round starts, players go about their duties and fulfill their role to the best of their abilities. For a janitor, this would be more trivial, like walking around the ship and tidying everyone else's crap. For a doctor, this would be healing the numerous sick and injured who were brought to the medical bay. But as I mentioned before, Space Station has its roots in being an atmospheric simulator. This means that some tasks can be, well, pretty dense. Everything from gases in the air to chemical composition is simulated, so some tasks can be really granular, such as measuring blood alcohol content or building systems to siphon harmful chemicals out of the air. It can be a lot. Some roles are strictly roleplay too. Jobs like psychologist, lawyer, and passenger have little functional role on a ship, but they help people have goals and give them a safe space to sort of mess around with mechanics. And there's a lot of little mechanics to mess around with in the game. Goofing off is a core part of the experience, and a lot of the time is spent doing stuff that is borderline trolly. One of my favorite hobbies, as a character, is stripping naked, hiding in a locker, and screaming over and over until I jump scare people. Or stealing all the food from vending machines and putting it all in the kitchen. Well, wait a minute, this sounds kind of boring. If most of the game is just me doing a job over and over, how is that fun? Well, Mr. Party Pooper, remember how I said there's also a game of Ultimate Werewolf happening in the background to all this? Because some players on the ship can opt into what are known as antagonist roles. Their objective is typically to stop other players from surviving the round or mess with them in some way, whether that means just trolling, sabotage, or in some cases outright murder. So even as you're playing your role, you're also dealing with the drama and fall-off of people trying to sabotage you and everyone else. Sometimes this is minorly inconvenient, other times it's catastrophic. From there, either you make it to the end of the round alive and you've won, or you die before evacuating and wait for the next round. In this way, there's not often any point to winning or losing a round. Nobody's really keeping score. Some servers might have very light forms of progression, but generally the reward you get stems mostly from what you got to experience in the game yourself, and not really like any kind of extrinsic reward. So that's kind of what you do. I think it's neat how Space Station typically manages to find a balance between being high stakes, and that you want your character and your friends to live through the round, and low stakes, where there's always another round to play, and if you die, it's not really the end of the world. It kind of strikes a level of impermanence where, while some of it matters, none of it really does, and that's kind of why trolling and being kind of goofy with it is sort of part of the game. I think what also helps Space Station be a fun game to play again and again is that roleplay is a pretty key part of the experience. Generally in Space Station, each round is treated as its own little slice of time. Just like a tabletop game, people are often encouraged to prevent bleed, cast aside old grudges, and enter the next session with just a fresh mindset. In this way, most servers actually frown upon playing the meta and taking information between rounds. Many servers also encourage a light form of roleplay at least, and in many cases playing the meta will get you in trouble. And I do think that's largely because a lot of the fun of a game like Space Station is just sucked out when people start trying to min-max it and play it the most optimal sort of way. There's a big difference between playing a game against an antagonist who's darting around the station, murdering everyone with ruthless efficiency, and one where they pin you in a corner and really try to make a narrative moment out of it. It just kind of hits different. Injecting roleplay into it creates a lot of opportunities for organic narratives to unfold like this. It becomes less about trying to win a round and more about trying to make a cool story together and just sort of mess around for a bit. It's fun. I think that if any of us were trying to just sort of hardline win the round, these sort of narrative arcs would never really get the space to play out. I think it's also cool that the role-playing spirit is kind of built into the very foundational rules around roleplay that servers maintain. Reasonable cause is a big consideration in a lot of interactions. It's usually against the rules to preemptively search for antagonists if you don't have reason to believe they're on the station in the first place. Because I think the whole premise would boil down to space cops and robbers if everybody immediately knew there were monsters aboard right from the beginning and just started hunting everybody from the outset. It also kind of ruined the element of surprise for the people who are playing the villains as well. Escalation is also something servers take seriously. It means you can't walk into a room and just start beating people you think are suspicious for no real reason. It also means you can't outright murder someone and have them removed from the round just because they punched you once or twice. As an aside, I think it's pretty funny how a lot of rules in escalation on any online role-playing are specifically working to prevent people in positions of power like the police from carrying out wanton acts of violence. I'm sure that doesn't say anything about our society, right? Anyways, it's interesting how a lot of these sort of roleplay rules exist not only to make the game a slower, more interesting burn, it's an effort to make a multiplayer game more fun for everyone involved as a baseline. But on that note, I think the community culture is really the thing around these games that keep me coming back, because it is what makes a Space Station game a Space Station game. I'm going to say something that by all accounts I really never imagined myself saying. The Space Station servers are full of people with mid-2000s internet forum troll mentality, but the community is miraculously incredibly inclusive and healthy. It feels like such a contradiction, but I found it to be true in most cases. Space Station servers are seeded with crude, dumb, XD random jokes. You can rip butts off people and fasten them to robots, fart jokes are common, death, murder, maiming is all often but a sick joke. Maybe it's because I've been on the internet for so long, but at this point in my life, I just expect anyone I meet with this sort of approach to humor to be, well, kind of an absolute jerk online, to be totally honest. But at least so far in Space Station communities, I've always found the opposite to be true. And a lot of these communities feel like they've been built from the ground up to be inclusive. And I think it's because if they weren't curating a kind of space where everybody felt comfortable in, it'd be hard to keep a community of players who not only want to learn the game, but also want to keep playing for any period of time. I mean, let's be honest, in most versions of the game, the controls are hardly user-friendly, and in many cases, learning the game takes a significant amount of time, which can be really daunting for new players. But to this end, most servers have active mentor chats and discords where new players can ask other players questions. If you ever get lost or stuck or need a hand, help is always just a message away. Even in character, all it takes is saying, "I'm new to this station," to have someone lend a hand. After all, everyone knows how hard the game is to start, but they also know how fun it is and how rewarding it can be to play with other people. I don't know, I've always just felt like a lot of the servers I've been on have been very efficient, self-regulating, and safe places. And most Space Station servers I've played on for any period of time has a rule list as long as a novella. This is because they're trying to make sure everyone feels included and has fun. Like, here's an excerpt from community rules and guidelines from my favorite Space Station 13 community, Goonstation. Like, I've rarely, if ever, on the entire internet come across such a straightforward and explicit rules around something like bigotry, especially calling specific terms and references players cannot and should not ever say for any reason out. In Space Station 14's official server rules, there's even explicit prevention of things like in-world speciesism, because it's acknowledged that even in a fictional video game context, being excluded or othered because you chose to play as the Mothman is not fun. There's no reason for it. And it makes sense given that the humor and cadence of Space Station really feels like something that might intrinsically have a huge draw to people who like being jerks on the internet. So cutting that off preemptively in your rules is integral. And given that the game's design largely only holds up when played by people who are willing to engage with the premise, this makes even more sense that a lot of communities require you to be whitelisted in order to play in the first place. There's an article by the Caves of Could developers where they talked about similar methods they use to keep bad faith actors out of their Discord. It's an approach I've always felt to be a very admirable one, so I'm going to include it in the links down below. I don't know. Honestly, I think I just miss this level of safety in an online community. Maybe with the way the internet and social media is these days, I've just come to not expect moderation to really be enforced or practiced in any practical way, shape, or form. Especially with the rights of marginalized people being baselessly put under attack from every angle day after day, it's cool to have communities that are vocally rejecting that. It's nice. I don't know. It's just refreshing to see servers full of 70 people all more or less getting along and abiding by the same rules because they want everyone to feel safe and carve a fun experience together. No animosity, no hate, just farting on Bible and blowing yourself up vibes. Space Station isn't a game that I play all the time, but I check in every few months to see what's new and how it's going. And whenever I do, I play it constantly for at least a week. It's like an old group of friends that I don't talk to that often, but when I do, we catch up like nothing ever changed. Those friends are inclusive, friendly, and my kind of people. I found family almost. Anyway, picking up Space Station 14 just has me feeling this love of Space Station all over again. I hope if nothing else that despite how daunting it might feel to play, the more people should take the plunge and give it a go, because these games really are unlike anything I've ever played before. I guess, when you're out there in the space station, pretending you're an average Joe who finds himself dragging a severely wounded stranger you found across the ship towards the medbay under the threat of imminent death, I can't help but think one thing. Aren't we all just people in space trying to survive?